everyone, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today we have another relationship scandal story. Let's get into it. My pillow seems to never stay dry these days. I never thought in a million years that I would be in this type of situation. The mental anguish and emotional pain I have endured in my young marriage all in the name of love is overwhelming. I thought I had fallen in love with a God-sent angel who put a ring on my finger in front of friends and family. It turns out my husband, who is a pastor, is a perfectly disguised Trojan horse that has come to wreck life and steal my joy. I met my husband pre-pandemic. He had recently moved to Texas at that time, and as my horrible fate would have it, our path crossed one Saturday evening after my routine evening jog. Drenched and exhausted from the rather intense aerobics workout I just completed, I sat on the park bench, slowly wiping away the dripping sweat flowing to my chest. I reduced the volume on my Samsung earbuds, blasting away my usual high-energy playlist that motivates me through my workout. There he was, my prince in shining armor with the sweetest smile. He asked me if it was okay to sit next to me on the bench. I nodded yes. In all honesty, the last thing on my mind that day was to strike a conversation with a stranger, as I was still recovering from muscle fatigue. I just wanted to rest for a little bit, wipe this sweat off and go home for a nice cold shower. However, it was something about him that day that left me glued to the chair, anticipating what kind of move this good-looking gentleman was about to make. After all, why would he choose to sit next to me when there are other park benches few feet away? I was fading away in my thoughts when he said hi to me. He introduced himself and explained how he was new in the city on a ministry assignment. There was no red flag during our initial meeting and conversation. I have never met a man introduce himself to me as a pastor before. He seemed sweet and genuine and even walked me to my car that day. We exchanged numbers and started talking on the phone. Just like that, the friendship and courtship started, which were sadly, the only best days of our relationship. Fast forward to 2020 when the pandemic brought the world to a halt. I had just received the terrible news that my services would no longer be needed at my job due to the business impact from COVID. I was left sad with emptiness inside me, and like most Americans, I was succumbed to severe with anxiety, not knowing what to do next. My then soon-to-be husband remarkably became my biggest supporter. He provided an emotional relief for me and encouragements. At this time, we were already in a relationship which kept blossoming as we spent most of our days at home together. His ministry has moved online at this time due to the lockdown and social distancing rule. He would always tell me, God has not given us the spirit of fear but the boldness and courage to stand up to devil and the COVID virus. He was one of the earlier violators of the mask policy, refusing to wear any mask except to businesses where mask was mandated. I thought this was a strength, even though I was happy to oblige to mask rules. I disliked the way COVID rules were politicized but admired my boyfriend for having a mind of his own even if they weren't popular opinions. Little did I know I was mistaking his stubbornness and rigidity for strength and courage. He proposed to me towards the end of 2020, and we got married mid-year in 2021. Let me explain how I found out my husband was a fake pastor, and reveal details of why I am now stuck in this marriage and torn between a divorce, or staying to work things out. Currently we are separated, but before the separation there were several red flags that I unfortunately missed over the course of our short-lived relationship. After the pandemic started to slow down and the stay-at-home policies were reversed, my husband went back into the ministry and helped reopen the church. It was a decently sized 500-seating capacity church filled with a fair mix of middle, young and older people attending weekly. My husband is an assistant supporting the main pastor and would often preach during the week. I was introduced to his church when we started dating and was received with warm reception and open arms. They were really nice to me and helped elevate my faith in God. The first red flag was my husband's habitual lies. During our counseling, my husband would often tell our counselor that we have never slept together, and we were practicing purity. The first time he made this statement caught me off guard, and I recollect the awkward conversation we had on our ride back home. I asked why he felt the need to lie, and he would tell me that the counselor would report back to the pastor, and he was afraid his personal lifestyle might be used against him. He would tell me it's against his conservative upbringing to have sex before marriage. What kind of archaic thinking is that in this new age, I would ask myself. I was confused and unsatisfied with his answer, especially when I asked him maybe we should quit having sex and wait till marriage. He would tell me to not be ridiculous and profess I was the last person he would ever lie to, even if his life depended on it. I was in love and didn't want to be difficult, as he uses reverse psychology to make me understand his point of view, and I would even feel bad for him. As time went on, I would later realize my husband is just a pathological liar who would lie about anything to escape accountability. He wasn't a smart liar either, as his lies would fall apart on questioning and he would become irate and yell at me. To support the church ministry, my husband encouraged me to invest in the church building expansion plan. He told me the main pastor has told him to raise extra funds off the books for individuals who would like to invest in the church construction program. He promised a 30 to 50% capital contribution tier scale return once congregation returns to church services at the church premises. This was before we got married, and I remembered asking specifics about the investment plan. I was so naive and too trusting, as I gave him my sign-on bonus from the post-pandemic job offer I received. When I started to ask him after we got married about when I will start realizing payback on the investment, everything started falling apart. I later realized there was no investment at all in the first place, as there was no church extra building construction going on at all. This was the first big scandal in our marriage, and I had no one to run to and explain how my husband had broken my trust and used me. He profusely apologized and promised to return the money over time. "We have the rest of our lives together," he would tell me, and plead with me to not break the marriage over financial dispute. I would get angry and tell him this is not about financial dispute but the scam, and the trust he had broken with me. I threatened to reveal this to the main pastor, and he would beg me to not air out our dirty laundry in the public, and this might break the church. I don't understand men. How could he do this to me? Was I supposed to hire a lawyer and request a contract review over a business idea my fiancé had presented to me? I wallowed in shame, because sometimes he would bring the subject back to me that I was also at fault for expecting a nonprofit church pay me a whooping 50% return, and that I was also equally greedy as he was. He claimed the money helped fund some of our wedding expenses because he was very broke at that time. I would cry from the hurt and sob for days. Last year, I knew I've had enough. My husband cheated on me with a 20-year-old member of the church singing choir, and I found out. After so many scandals and broken trust, I started to realize this thing has taken its toll on us. I was never the type of wife that would check my husband's phone because I was too trusting, but as the lies went on non-stop, I knew I had to decide. We haven't separated at this point, but I have started to look for a divorce attorney. I had started taking birth control pills without informing my husband about this decision because I couldn't fathom the thought of having a baby for this man I couldn't no longer trust. It was so tough because I was dealing with this hurt all alone because I wanted to protect his reputation. Not even my best friend knew about this, and I would pretend to her everything was perfect in my marriage because we were just too young in the marriage. I thought maybe I rushed into the marriage too early because I was afraid of being alone, especially during the pandemic. I found out husband cheated when the side chic lady stopped me after a Sunday service and asked if she could talk to me in private. My husband was still making his greeting rounds in church after the service was over, while I waited for him by the church entrance. The lady took me to the children wing of the church in a secluded room and started to cry and beg me for forgiveness. I was shocked and told her she has never offended me, and I even complimented her beautiful singing voice. She started to get herself together and started to explain how she started the relationship with my husband, and she knew him before I even married him. She said she felt betrayed when he chose me over her, and they stopped seeing each other briefly after I married him, but continued just a week later after our marriage. I remembered letting out an anger scream in the room as my head started to spin out of control. I went into a rage and couldn't listen to any more of what this lady had to say. At this point I broke down crying. I have endured so much from this man, but this one broke me. The lady hurriedly left the room and ran out as I was fuming at this point. One of the teenage teachers came to the room to ask if I was alright. I realized I had let the built-up sorrow, anger, and failed marriage frustration I was enduring get the best of me, and couldn't handle the news with grace. The very first thing I did was march up to the main pastor and broke down. I demanded I see him immediately, as it was life and death. With tears in my eyes, I started to explain everything to him. From the scam and now the cheating scandal, I was a woman hurt. My husband drove me to depression and I knew it had to end that day. The pastor called my husband to the room, and I told him I couldn't stand seeing my husband at that moment. The pastor later went on to speak with my husband, after I left, the outcome being a suspension. I left the room and called Uber to take me home. Before my husband came home, I had packed a few of my belongings and went to live with my best friend who I later confessed to as well, explaining everything I had been enduring in my failed marriage. The main pastor would later call me to ask if I wanted to press charges or provide evidence of construction fraud that I alleged, but I declined because I don't want my story to be sensationalized or broadcasted to friends and families. I chose an anonymous online platform to explain my ordeal. I am currently separated from my husband who has been calling and trying every means to reach out to him. He found out I was living with my best friend and attempted to stop over one day. After I avoided seeing him that day, I moved to a hotel where I am currently staying. I don't know what the next chapter is for me, but I know I am tired and exhausted from this emotional stress. I will give update about the next chapter of my life when time heals this phase I am currently going through. The divorce isn't final yet due to a few complications, but the main church pastor texted me to come for counseling with my separated husband. He talked to me about possible forgiveness after our therapy session. I realized he might be trying to repair a reputation damage this scandal would cause the church if I came out with this story. I just want people to learn from my mistakes, to never ignore the warning signs, especially at the early stage of a relationship. I am no saint, but a liar would always justify their lies and repeat those lies till it becomes a version of truth in their head. Falling in love is easy, but falling out of love always comes with a tag. The tag is a broken heart, inability to trust again, tears and plenty of tears, loss of self-esteem and so much more. Honestly, I don't know if I should blow this story up and reveal my husband's name, which would impact the church, or continue with the divorce process and finally close that chapter of my life. The church absolutely has no fault in this, but I was advised it is not a good look for public opinion optics. My mental health is important at this moment, so I would focus on my healing process and accept my destiny as the fool who married for love with the wrong man. Relationship scandal listeners, please share your comments about this story. Is this submission a one-sided story and we need to listen to the husband's point of view?